We always enjoy the college football talk with Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Kind enough to have me on a regular basis. Please check it out. Again, Michigan Podcast right here on YouTube and on your favorite audio platform. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm well, man. Like a lot of people in the Midwest, I'm waiting for spring to actually arrive. How are you?
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Here in Connecticut, we had a nice 75 to 80 degrees for about 5 days and perfectly blue skies, but it's dipped back into the 40s and a lot of gloom everywhere. Yes. Okay, well, let's start off. Let's go with Michigan. So here's the first thing that comes to mind with the maize and blue. We had a number of SEC callers and commenters in our chat over the last couple of nights who, just because of the final score and what it looked like against Georgia, have no respect for Michigan football. Can you give a pretty detailed framework on what you think that gap really is between Michigan and the powers in the SEC at the top, those two, Bama, Georgia?
I mean, I think it's the same conversation you'd have everywhere in the country. I mean, Michigan last year was essentially Clemson without Deshaun Watson. If you go look at those early Deshaun Watson Clemson teams, they were kind of teams that leading up to those seasons had recruited somewhere between 8 and 15 in the country, as Michigan had. The difference was, they landed with they ended up with a true program changing difference maker at the most important position in the country or in the sport. But man 1 through 22, those two Alabama teams that Clemson nearly beat twice in a row and then did beat the second time, man 1 through 22, the NFL draft proved those were better teams. I think the NFL draft is going to prove here in a couple of weeks that Georgia had a historically great defense. I think Nakobe Dean, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker may be the number one pick. All those guys I just mentioned, I think they will all be first-round picks in the NFL draft. I think Lewis Cine may be a first-round pick. I think at the very least he'll be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. I think you'll see Channing Tindall, one of the other linebackers there, also end up Quay Walker, another linebacker there. Those guys are all going to be top 75, 80 picks in the NFL draft. When you saw what those guys did at the NFL Scouting Combine, we're talking, on a historic level. This was the LSU offense as a defense in 2021 is what Georgia did. So the LSU offense in 2019, the Georgia defense last year, those are arguably the two best singular units we have seen produced in college football. You're probably going to go back to USC with Leinart and Bush and dual Heisman Trophy winners in the backfield. So I don't think it's between them and Michigan. I think it's those two teams and pretty much everybody else in college football. Alabama took their shot at, or Ohio State took their shot at Alabama in the national championship game. And, it kind of didn't look much different, just a different style of play, but physically they were never in that game either. And I think I just think it's just those two programs, I think, have separated themselves from a recruiting standpoint. You look at the class that A&M put together, or shall we say acquired last year. Okay, if they do that 2 or 3 more times, they'll be in that class. You start stacking those kinds of classes, they'll be in that group. But you can't just do it one time. LSU kind of did it one time and got lucky with Joe Burrow as a transfer. And then we've seen reality return them back to earth in the last 2 years. And now they're on another completely different head coach when Ed Orgeron was the toast of college football 3 years ago. I do my team total talent ratings and I'm working on them right now coming out of the spring, and Georgia and Alabama in terms of roster talent, man, are way ahead of everybody else. It's like not even close, actually. Okay.
So you're taking the 2020 national championship game, Bama, Ohio State, as being the norm and not the exception.
Yeah. I just think those two programs are recruiting at a different level comprehensively. I think Ohio State has figured out how to recruit at that level offensively on one side of the ball. I think that Michigan's last two classes back to back, the J.J. McCarthy class and this one, I actually think, and the 2019 one, those are the three back-to-back-to-back best classes Jim Harbaugh has had, and Michigan has had in about 20 years. And I think you'll see that play itself out on the field this fall and the next couple of falls. I think there's more difference makers like a Donovan Edwards, like a J.J. McCarthy in those classes, those kinds of game breakers. But just the sheer amount of talent Alabama and Georgia have accumulated. Every year, I started doing the team total talent ratings 5 years ago. Michigan podcast actually debuted 5 years ago today. We created our Twitter account today. Debuted, thank you, 5 years ago today. Our first episode in May of 2017 was my first rollout of the team total talent ratings. Alabama and Georgia have been in the top three of every single one. And they're so far ahead of everybody else in college football heading into this season.
So one more time, I'm going to take a crack at this. And in a sense, everything you say past this isn't going to matter because it's all speculation. We saw the one game on the field, 34-11, and in some aspects, not even that close. So you think if Michigan and Georgia played a number of times, that was pretty much the game that we would see time after time?
I think Michigan had enough talent that if they played a 7-game series, they'd win a game. But I think that, what you're going to see in the NFL draft here in a couple of weeks is if teams are smart, you're going to see 3 Michigan players picked in the first round. All right. Aiden will go no lower than number 2. If I'm one of those teams, a Philly, a New Orleans, a Kansas City at the end of round 1, and I'm saying there were 2 first-round picks, and I let David Ojabo slip to the second round, that's a foolish choice, particularly because I get that 5th year on the contract. And so this year, while he's recouping from the Achilles, that's a free year. Doesn't cost me a year on a contract. He's just scratching the surface of what he is. He was playing, Eurosport just a few years ago. And Daxton Hill, I actually think is a better. It has for some of what is today's NFL is going to fit teams better than Kyle Hamilton. He's a far more explosive athlete. He can play outside corner, slot corner, free safety, depending on what system you play. If you're in a nickel defense, as most NFL teams are, Daxton Hill is a better fit for that than Kyle Hamilton is, in my view. If you play more of a base defense, then Kyle Hamilton's a throwback to what you used to see with guys like Steve Atwater and things of that nature. And I think he can be a dominant player. But here's the problem, though, Mark. Outside of those guys, like the next Michigan player that gets picked might not be to like the 5th round. You see what I'm saying? Georgia's got one tier of guys that are going to the top 15.
I hear
another tier of guys that are going to the top 30. Another tier of guys that are going to the top 50. They're just coming at you in friggin' waves. And there's only 2 programs that have recruited at that level consistently the last few years, and it's Alabama and Georgia. I do think if they played 7 times, it'd be a 5-game series. I don't think all 4 of the other wins, the other 3 wins for Georgia would be 34-11. I think Michigan would figure out maybe a little earlier, we got to put in the quarterback who can actually throw the ball down the field and escape a pass rush. And then you wouldn't have the whole, for a month and a half leading up to the game, or for a month, all the Michigan players are all getting awards, right? This kind of reminds me of the Ohio State, Alabama, or Florida championship game in 2006, where Troy Smith's winning the Heisman and all these guys are winning awards, and Florida's being told for 6 weeks that they're a 9-point underdog, right? Georgia had an entire month to be pissed about losing to Alabama. Michigan's out there. Aiden's winning awards. Harbaugh's winning awards. All kinds of the offensive lines winning awards. And so I don't know that emotional dynamic, I think that played into this result. But the talent on the roster, I think that on last year's Georgia team, I think maybe 7 guys in our uniform would have started for that team, maybe.
Okay, so to broaden out the conversation to the Big Ten and the SEC, and really the SEC and the rest of college football, as I stated to a number of people the other night who were trying to make an argument out of bringing the SEC down to everybody else's level and argue that the Big Ten is an equal, I said I would love to be able to have a honest debate with you. I would love to be able to roll out a series where I'm grinding through metrics to try to determine the best conference, but it's just a waste of time. The SEC is the best conference, and it's decisive. Okay, we know that's where we are, and we've been there for a long time now.
It's decisive because Alabama and Georgia are decisively recruiting better than everybody else. Like I don't think the next tier of teams, LSU and Texas A&M, pick the next three teams: LSU, Texas A&M. Who are the next three programs? LSU, Texas A&M, and who else? Florida.
Sure,
they're not decisively better than Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. They're just not.
But if you have to take down the next tier in the Big Ten and you eliminate Ohio State and Michigan as being the Alabama and Georgia of the Big Ten, then I think
we play that game everywhere. Get rid of USC when they're competent, and Washington when they're competent historically. Get rid of Clemson or whoever, Miami, when they're competent historically. That would be the case. It's just more relative with everybody else. Alabama and Georgia are recruiting at a historically high level simultaneously. I don't know that we've ever seen anything like this. Probably the last time we've seen a conglomeration of talent in college football within just a couple of programs like this across the board. We're not just talking, stables of the USC running back, of the John of the the John of the 60s and 70s, the John McKay and John Robinson era, all right, or the quarterbacks of the Miami era, where they went from, who am I thinking of for the Buffalo Bills, to
Kelly and Kosar,
to Steve Walsh, or to Vinny Testaverde, to Steve Walsh, to Craig Erickson. We're talking full, complete rosters. The last time we saw something like this was post World War II. All right, we had teams like Michigan and Notre Dame and Iowa pre-flight acquiring so many players because of military service and who got out of the military and everything else. And they were just like way better than everybody else. And Michigan's going to the Rose Bowl and winning like 49-0. Okay. We haven't seen anything like this from a talent acquisition standpoint for a couple of teams over that. Michigan, Ohio State were like this in the era of 105 scholarships in the 70s ahead of the rest of the Big Ten. But two programs simultaneously ahead of everyone else in college football. I would argue we've not seen anything like this in since post World War II.
So I'm trying to determine if we're still on the same page regarding the rest of the SEC. If you take 3 through, let's say, 10 in the SEC versus everybody else, the SEC is still better. 3 through 10.
Probably, but I don't think it's like decisive.
Okay. So what is the hope going forward? Because in my conversations, the feedback is pretty much that the Big Ten fan is the only one that has enough history on his side, money, resources, all those things to take that kind of pride in the fight against the SEC. You're not going to get a reasonable ACC fan or Big 12 fan or Pac-12 fan that thinks that they're going to stand up to the SEC, but the Big Ten fan does. But this just seems to be rolling and rolling and rolling. And because of geography, is the fight hopeless?
Well, what you have at Alabama is you have a program that has had its ups and downs, but has also produced 3 national championship coaches: Wallace Wade, Bear Bryant, and Gene Stallings. So the DNA is already there. And now you put there the at least the greatest college coach since Bear Bryant, and maybe of all time. That's just a harmonic convergence. All right. What you have at Georgia is Georgia is the chief beneficiary of the Sun Belt migration. And it's the state where more pro athletes per capita are taken out of the state of Georgia in all major sports than any other state in the country. Okay. And so when you look at the old mining towns of Pennsylvania from back in the day, the coal towns, the industrial manufacturing towns in Ohio and Michigan, the migration of that family base largely left those states and went to a place like Georgia. And so Georgia is what they used to say about Ohio State, that if Ohio State just gets, essentially the all-state football team, the majority of those guys every year, they just roll out of bed and win 10 games. That's where Georgia, in an 11-game schedule, that's where Georgia is now. And there's no Georgia State. So we're talking 1960s, 1970s level demographics like Woody Hayes and it had in his backyard at Ohio, with no other major university to compete with it. And so it's going to look a lot like what it looked like with Woody Hayes in the 1960s and 70s. So I think you have those two unique situations. It just so happens to be They're in the same league, but on opposite sides of the division, so they can actually be simultaneously great without being in each other's way, like Oklahoma and Nebraska could not be. They were in each other's way. Michigan and Ohio State could not be. They were in each other's way. All right, UCLA and USC could not be, or Texas it could not be. They were in each other's way. Texas and Oklahoma for the longest time could do that when they were in opposite conferences, but now they're in each other's way. All right, so this is, I think, a very, very unique situation. In terms of the future of college football, I think that there's only two things that will stop this trend from happening. One is a true playoff is introduced. Right now, we don't have a playoff in college football. We have an invitational. And so we have the worst of both worlds right now. Once you enter into a perceived playoff, no matter what the sport, your regular season is to set up and serve that playoff. That's just the reality of the paradigm. But the problem is unlike the playoff in any other sport in America, there is no way to ensure yourself a position other than just be called Georgia and Alabama and only have one loss or less. But even then, it's just kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. We know that's true, but it's not like official. Like I can play my way into the NFL playoffs. I know what I can objectively accomplish to make it. I know what I can objectively accomplish to make it in the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, men's college basketball. There is no objective measure I can accomplish that I know for sure. Let's look at Michigan for an example. Just this year. Let's say we go 12-0. Beat Ohio State again. But look at our schedule. It's basically a 4-game schedule. And the other 8 games, Mark, you know this better than me. We're going to be favored by 2 to 3 touchdowns in all those other games, with maybe one exception. Maybe at Iowa, we're only favored by 1 touchdown because it's at Iowa. All right, but we're going to be a touchdown or more favorite in all these other 8 games. All right, so it's a 4-game schedule. Alabama and Georgia are undefeated. Play each other in the ACC championship game, close game, one loses. They're both getting in, right? There's 2 spots right there, right? Okay. Clemson goes undefeated, wins the ACC. Are they getting in, Mark?
They got Notre Dame and South Carolina on their schedule.
That's 3 spots, okay? Oklahoma goes undefeated, wins the Big 12. Michigan's undefeated, wins the Big 10. USC goes undefeated, wins the Pac-12. Now the brand name cachet, like the year Ohio State got in over TCU and Baylor and then won the darn thing, okay? The whole brand name cachet is thrown out the window because those brands are just as big as ours. You see where I'm going with this?
Sure.
There's nothing you can do that you can't officially be in.
You have the same line that I do when I talk to callers all the time to let them know there is no objective measure here.
No, there isn't. There's no playoff. It's an invitational. And so here's what we have. We have no NCAA enforcement. We have an NIL system that some schools, and Michigan's one of them, stupidly are pretending is regulated, and this should not. Here's what the NIL should be. The university cannot directly compensate you, otherwise you lose an amateur status. Other than that, you're an adult. We have a thing called the IRS. Whatever some third party wants to compensate for you, better make sure you report it, because the IRS wants their cut and they have subpoena power. Just ask Willie Nelson and Wesley Snipes, okay? And other than that, it's not our business. Not our business. As long as you're not being directly compensated by a nonprofit called the university, not our business what Bubba the Love Sponge car maker wants to give you or anybody else. You're an adult. Just better have a good accountant, because the IRS, these things aren't under the table anymore, and the IRS is keeping track, and they'll want their cut. That's what the NIL should be. So we have this 2-tiered NIL system where some schools are doing this, others are not, pretending that it's still the 80s. We have no NCAA enforcement and an invitational. That just screams oligarchy. That just screams Star Chamber. That just screams, Alexa, how do I create a system for a few elites to absolutely create, thank you, Alexa, my Alexa actually answered. That's funny. Stop. Alexa, stop. I forgot I had an Alexa over there.
We should probably record Alexa right now and not you.
Yes.
We want the formula.
This is the perfect storm to create a 2-tiered system, is what we have. So there's 2 options out of this. And by the way, I don't blame Alabama, Georgia, or anybody else for fully exploiting it. I don't think it's immoral to pay young men money for playing a dangerous sport that risks their health and life and time on their lifespan at the back end especially given the billions of dollars they're generating for you. So this isn't, I don't mean for this to be moral preening. This is just an observation. It's just the truth. It's an observation of where we are. Okay. So there's only two ways out of this. A, you expand to a true playoff where there is an objective way for teams to know they get in because you have re-regionalized the sport back to its original roots. Okay. And you still likely, I think Tom Fernelli at CBS Sports did a study and found that since the NCAA tournament expanded in '85, actually fewer teams have won the NCAA basketball tournament that have won the college football national championship. And it's close, but it's it's like one or two fewer. That's not the point, though. When we sit here on Selection Sunday, Mark, how many teams believe they can win? Or how many teams believe they can get to a second weekend or get to a Final Four? We see 8, 9, 7, 10 seeds get to Final Fours all the time. Okay? And so that level of belief democratizes the recruiting process. See, what we have going on right now is there's another layer of players that we aren't even going to see at Georgia and Alabama this year. That in a more equitable system wouldn't be sitting there biding their time at Georgia and Alabama this year. They'd be gone because they realize, well, I can go to the playoff playing here. I can go to the playoff playing there. I don't have to sit here and wait. That's what we have in college basketball, and that's why about 40% of college basketball players will transfer at least one time in their career. All right, we don't have a democratized, equitable spread of talent in college football. And the number one thing that would change that is a real playoff that gave more teams real hope that they could legitimately compete for this on their own. If we're not going to do that, now I think we will do that. And the only reason we didn't do it this year is the Big Ten smartly got together, smartly said, why would we cut a deal with ESPN right now when our TV, if we just wait a couple more years, our TV partners can come in and take away SEC, ESPN monopoly over control over college football, and we'll bring Fox and Amazon and CBS and everything into the process. So I do think you will see that in a couple of years. If we don't, then we really should try to, in here in the Midwest, go back to looking at this the way we did when our generation was growing up. That really the ultimate goal is winning the Big Ten and getting to the Rose Bowl. If you do anything else above that, God bless you. You had a great year. But given the inequities in the system, that's just not a realistic. That's just not a realistic year-to-year goal. We have never had a program. We didn't have recruiting rankings when Woody Hayes could just dominate a much more dense recruiting state like Ohio in the 60s and 70s. In the internet recruiting era, we have never had a program recruit the way Ohio State has the last 5 years. And they're not much closer. They might score one more touchdown against Alabama and Georgia than last year's Michigan team. That just goes to show you where we're at right now.
But to your most recent point about people just in the Midwest saying, okay, we're going to adjust our goals and just turn off the playoff and just be more realistic about this, that Americans have a gold medal mentality, and
right.
just to shut off. We're going to expand the playoff here in a couple of years and shut off all the talk about the playoff when that's everything. That's not going to happen.
And that's why we're going to expand the playoff here in a couple of years, because Kevin Warren did the first smart thing he's done since he's commissioner and realized I've got to stop this SEC train with ESPN on the tracks. I got to stop it dead in its tracks right now. So let me go get the guys at the ACC who hate their TV deal with ESPN. Let's go get the new guy at the Pac-12. Who wants to reinvent his league. Let's get together as a voting block and stop this thing dead in its tracks right now. We'll let this contract play itself out. We'll screw Texas and Oklahoma over in the process, because now they've got a couple more years to figure out. You guys you're going to make $90 million a year to finish 5th and 6th in that league every year. God bless you. Good luck to you. I don't think your fans in 2031 are going to be buying T-shirts that say $90 million a season, baby. They're not going to be. Your fans ain't chanting SEC when they're 7-5 in Austin. They're not going to be doing that. You average 7 wins a year for the last decade in a Big 12 that set itself up for you to be successful, gave you everything you wanted. Now you're going to go over there. Here's looking out. And so I think that's the first smart thing Kevin Warren has done. All right, he threw his wooden shoe, his little sabot, he threw it into the works to sabotage the momentum and blew it up. And now we'll have an open, democratized bidding process. ESPN's influence will be further diluted along with the SEC's. And I think that was the first smart thing that Kevin Warren did.
Okay, so everything you just said, I'm on board with and also see it happening before our very eyes, except for an objective playoff system. I don't think that's going to result in
I don't
this.
think the Big Ten will agree to anything that doesn't have automatic bids. The Big Ten and Pac-12 won't agree to anything that doesn't.
Yeah, but having automatic bids versus having a playoff selection committee determine buys and determine the number of teams and what teams.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there won't be the level of metric that you're talking about. But for the first time, you will objectively be able to say, if I accomplish a goal, I am in. I earned my way in. You will
Win
be
the
able to say
conference.
that.
Absolutely.
And I do think there will be automatic bids for home field as well. I think they'll do that so that teams don't tank at the end of the year and things of that nature. So there will be, it won't be to the degree you may want it, but it'll be 100% better than what we have right now.
Sure. And so if we go west of Oklahoma and Texas, nothing has been relevant out there for 6 or 7 years. Since Chip Kelly's teams, Mark Helfrich took it over, they go to a national championship. Since then, nothing. Lincoln Riley's the Great White Hope. They are playing on ESPN, their spring game. So ESPN has designated that to be the college football narrative that they want to run with this spring, is that we're going to showcase Lincoln Riley and USC. Okay. For me, two criterias of a great college football coach, not necessarily criteria, but whether I can evaluate that guy to be a great coach in any circumstances, whether he's done it at multiple places or he has at least built what he has at his current location, meaning Dabo Swinney built Clemson, Urban Meyer's gone to a number of places, so is Nick Saban. Lincoln Riley, how much stock do you put in what he accomplished at Oklahoma versus what Bob Stoops left him?
I think that's a great question. I don't think it's relevant for USC, and here's why. The tradition and legacy of USC is they are heads and shoulders the superior program in that conference historically. Number two, he is going to the place, perhaps no more place in all of America, where perception matters more than reality than where he is going. Meaning that he comes with real star power. And that matters more in LA and the program he will be attached to, right? I mean, how many of us thought when they brought Pete Carroll in 2001 after he kind of flamed out in the NFL, he was like the fourth or fifth choice to hire him for the job, but he totally bought in to the perception and the Hollywood of the USC program. We got Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell on the sidelines. Recruits are calling us up now. And I think Lincoln absolutely plays into all of that. He's coming into that league at the perfect time. There is no power standing in his way. The program that's recruited the best in that league is Oregon. It just lost its coach. And it's got a coach that's never coached before coming in. So you have, Washington is down. Probably historically, them and UCLA, the next two traditional powers in that league. UCLA had the best roster it's had in about 10 years, and it produced, what was it, a Holiday Bowl bid, I think, if I remember right, or something like that. So it's the perfect time. He's got all that star power, all that perception. I think your question becomes relevant in about 4 years. All right, when the initial buzz of this wears off, and he's no longer selling Oz anymore. Okay. But now we do pay attention to the man behind the curtain, and we see, has he gotten to the playoffs? Has he won a game there? All right. I think that matters in about 4 years when if he doesn't do those things, the Alabamas and Georgias and those programs and go out to California and try to recruit against him as all hat and no cattle, basically. But right now, all that perception, it's like when we brought Jim Harbaugh in. Okay, now Harbaugh had a hell of a lot more of a resume of doing things on his own than Lincoln Riley does. Because I get the whole, in another context, as Jim Harbaugh would say, Lincoln Riley was kind of born on third and credited with a triple, right? Okay. But right now it doesn't matter because he comes with all that buzz himself, and then the buzz of USC, and still, even with California losing population, still one of the most densely populated recruiting hotbeds in the country. He has to truly suck to fail. Okay. He can be overrated and because of the things you're pointing out, and still be great because the buzz factors, which matter a lot to 16, 17, and the 18-year-old kids he's going to be recruiting, Those things are all in his favor. Now, I will be interested to see how fast he can turn this roster around. I look at our roster right now at Michigan, and with the one exception of linebacker, and the Big Ten has struggled. That's kind of been Ohio State's bugaboo the last few years. That's the one position they've not quite been able to unlock in recruiting, is that one, right? So with the exception of linebacker, this is the first time that I can absolutely make the case Michigan is 3 deep at every position, everywhere else, with the exception of linebacker. And I've not said that about Michigan since probably the early 2000s, because we've been stacking classes now and retaining those players. Now, if you look at that's different than the roster USC is going to have. This is going to be a very transfer-heavy roster, and he's not taking all those transfers, folks, because the roster he inherited was good. He's taking them because it was not. Now, what my talent numbers show is their top-line players are going to be, because of those transfers, better than anybody else in the Pac-12 has. But their depth, they're not going to be 3 deep at every single position. So injuries, what happens if we get in to having to play more of those reserves? What happens if they get to 11-1 because they roll a weak league and get into the playoff? And now they're playing one of these teams that have been stacking those recruiting classes. How ugly could that get? But as long as that happens in year 1 or 2, he can turn that to his advantage and say, see, look what I did with this roster in this transition era. You're the player that then helps us get to that next step. So I really think he's got about a 4-year window here before he has to even come close to worrying about face planting. And even if he's half the coach of his reputation, I don't see how he face plants.
So we've looked forward. I want to take you back here as we close. We're running a series of call-in shows where we're going decade by decade, looking at disputed national championships. So look at the entirety of college football, and as a historian of the game, what 1, 2, 3, however many you want to select, really irk you in regards to justice not being served, and whether that be a selection back in the poll days or selection by the BCS or in this playoff era?
I mean, the obvious answer for me would be 1997. And it's really not, I've never been upset about what happened in 2006. Michigan had a chance on the field against Ohio State. It was a great game, but putting myself in the shoes of Florida, I have the same exact record. I won what was that year arguably the best conference in America, and Michigan had their crack, and so they get another one. I mean, if I was a Florida fan, I would be strongly in favor of those arguments. So the only reason I would have felt that 2006 we got robbed is just if I was a homer, and you know me, I suck at being a homer. I like truth too much. 1997 though is what bothers me, and it doesn't bother me that we shared it with Nebraska. Both those teams, I mean, if they had played that year, it had been like the year Ohio State and Miami played, like 40 guys played NFL rosters. The amount of pros on those two teams was crazy. Okay, and I really don't think running a tight formation a tight formation option attack against that Michigan defense is a recipe for success. But I'm not so sure we're going to sit there in a pro formation and run the ball downhill against that Nebraska front either. I mean, that might have looked like that LSU Alabama game when it was, what was it, 10-3 or 10-7 or something? Yeah, 9-7. So thank you. But what bothers me about it is the way that it happened. If you thought Nebraska was better the whole time, I'm totally okay with it. All right. But Phil Fulmer voting us 4th in the coaches poll, which is what gave Nebraska the margin to move up there. There's no argument. I can make arguments for why Nebraska.
Sorry, Steve, real quick. The Fulmer vote in and of itself pushed Nebraska to 1 in the coaches poll.
Yeah, that's how they moved to 1. He voted us 4th. There's no justification for that. None. There's all kinds of I can make a nice affirmative case for voting Nebraska number 1 for that season. I could make it. There's no case for voting us number 4. We went into that poll or into that bowl game number 1 in every poll. We beat a top 10 team. You may think it wasn't as impressive as what Nebraska did against Peyton Manning, and I'm okay if you think that. But 4th, no reason for that. And
So if
uh,
Philip,
and
you have to
and
wonder whether Philip Fulmer was confused that them getting beat down by Nebraska is a reflection on how good a team Michigan is.
there's a
I
lot of
don't
talk that
understand the
was
connection.
basically revenge for Woodson getting the Heisman, is what a lot of people believe. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Sure.
that to me, and the idea of let's give it to Tom Osborne because he was retiring. Let me put it to you this way. If Osborne wasn't retiring, does Nebraska share the championship that year? Because I think the answer is no. What do you think?
I don't know. I know that it's I know that the fair outcome was for them to split a national championship. They both played in power leagues, played great dominant football. They both had a couple close calls, etc. I've looked at it enough to know that the outcome was fair based on that system. Now, of course, we wanted to see the two teams play, but if I was sitting there with a vote and I had to select Nebraska or Michigan, then I'd really have to grind it down.
Then there's been other years. 1993 never made any sense to me. I've always been a big believer. If you play a team and you beat them on the field and have the same or better record at the end of the year when it's all played out, you should be ranked ahead of them. Okay?
Absolutely.
So Notre Dame beat Florida State on the field. They have the same record, and somehow Florida State's the national champion. That never has made sense to me. Didn't the same thing happen though in 1989, if I remember right? No, yeah. Because you had Miami. No, because Miami did beat Notre Dame that year. Yeah. And that was Holtz's argument, I remember, in 93. He said, hey, in 89, we had the same record as Miami at the end of the year. We beat number 1 Colorado in the bowl game, but y'all told me that Miami's the national champion because they beat us on the field. And now why doesn't the same thing apply to us in 1993? He was exactly right about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just think the entirety of college football history in regards to who's been voted number 1, BCS number 1 versus 2, there's just a whole lot that needs to be uncovered there and figured out. And, you know, I've got seasons, Stephen, where I've run through the national championships over the last 100 years. And I have said, you know, we've got 5 national champions for this particular season because there's no other way to slice it, to be fair. All right.
Yeah.
Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Got to get on over there, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite audio platform. Steve, always learn a lot and appreciate the college football conversation, sir.
You got it, brother. Go Blue. Take care.